Halloween night, 2004, Maple Creek, California. Rachel Lawson's last act was simple, opening her door to hand out candy. Minutes later, her home was silent. Crushed candy covered the floor, and a blood-stained wolf mask lay by the door. Rachel was gone, without a trace. For 14 years, her town lived in fear, until DNA finally revealed the shocking truth. Where are you watching from tonight? Comment your city and time zone, and don't forget to subscribe, follow, and turn on notifications for more true crime cold cases that time refused to bury. In the sleepy suburb of Maple Creek, the houses huddled close together as if to keep out the October chill. Halloween had a special magic in this neighborhood, a night when porch lights glowed amber, when children darted across yards in capes and wings, and when every home was transformed by the warm flicker of jack-o'-lanterns. But behind the painted smiles of ghosts and witches, not even the oldest residents could have guessed what would unfold before midnight struck. House number 712 on Maple Lane was awash in pumpkin light, the soft hum of a nearby street lamp mingling with the laughter echoing from down the block. Rachel Lawson, 35 and heavily pregnant, moved slowly through her cozy living room, arranging a bowl of miniature candies on the entry table. Her every movement was gentle, almost ritualistic. Perhaps it was the anticipation of her baby's arrival, or simply the hope that tonight, for once, she could forget the ache of the past. She kept one eye on her phone, waiting for the buzz that would tell her Mark was nearby with Emma. Her husband had taken their 5-year-old daughter out trick-or-treating, a tradition Rachel always cherished, but now watched from the window, one hand unconsciously resting on her stomach. The house was still, but outside the wind shook the brittle leaves, casting shifting shadows on the glass. Every so often, a group of costumed children would scamper up the path, giggling, faces hidden behind rubber masks, and Rachel would greet them with a bright smile and a handful of treats. She texted Mark, "Let me know when you're heading back. Emma will want to show me her candy haul." The message lingered on the screen for a moment, before disappearing into digital silence. The clock ticked closer to 9. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, a reminder that even on the most enchanted night of the year, reality still pressed in. Rachel tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the soft glow of the pumpkins, the spicy scent of cinnamon candles burning in the kitchen, the calm reassurance of home. She glanced at the framed photos on the mantel. Emma's first steps, a family trip to the ocean, the fuzzy ultrasound picture from just last month. In these moments, surrounded by small comforts, Rachel allowed herself to believe that Maple Creek truly was a place where nothing bad could happen. The doorbell rang, jolting her from her reverie. She glanced at the clock. 8:42 p.m. "Probably one last group before Mark and Emma get home," she murmured, adjusting the neckline of her sweater and grabbing the candy bowl. She swung open the door with practiced cheerfulness, but there were no laughing children on the porch. Instead, a figure stood silently in the shadows, taller than any trick-or-treater she'd seen that evening. The porch light illuminated a grotesque wolf mask, its eyes dark, its muzzle painted with exaggerated cartoonish fangs. The costume's fur was matted, streaked with something that looked almost like mud. Or was it something else? Rachel's smile faltered, her heart pounding with an unease she couldn't quite name. "Can I help you?" she managed, her voice steady despite the cold knot tightening in her chest. The figure said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy and unnatural, broken only by the wind rattling through the brittle branches overhead. In that instant, Time seemed to slow. Rachel took a step back, instincts prickling, a sense that something was deeply, terribly wrong. But before she could react, the figure surged forward with a force that sent the candy bowl clattering to the floor. Brightly colored wrappers scattered across the wood like fallen leaves. And then, just as suddenly, the world went still. Outside, the sounds of Halloween continued. A child's distant scream of delight, the crunch of footsteps on gravel, the low hum of passing cars. But inside number 712, an unthinkable silence settled, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Long after the porch light flickered and went out, the only sign that anything had happened was a trail of crushed candy on the floor, and a single unanswered knock echoing through the night. Before the horror of that Halloween night, Rachel Lawson's life had been a tapestry of simple joys, small heartaches, and the everyday miracles that make up a quiet existence. By day, she was the beloved art teacher at Maple Creek Elementary, her classroom bursting with color and laughter. She wore her kindness like a second skin, greeting every student by name and encouraging even the shyest child to pick up a brush. Her gentle patience was legendary. She believed every mistake was just the beginning of something beautiful, that every child had a hidden gift waiting to shine. Yet beneath Rachel's warmth lay a shadow she could never quite escape. 4 years earlier, her world had shattered on a cloudless summer afternoon in San Jose. The memory clung to her like the faint scent of chlorine. Her 3-year-old son Ethan slipping beneath the turquoise surface of their backyard pool, the sun shimmering on the water as she'd turned her back for what seemed like seconds. The frantic search, the desperate call to 911, the ambulance that came too late. Even now, Rachel sometimes woke in the dead of night gasping for air, her hand reaching for a boy who wasn't there. Ethan's death became the fault line that split her life in two. Her first husband, David Brooks, could not forgive her, or himself. He launched a lawsuit, accusing her of negligence. The trial dragged on for months, the courtroom filled with whispered judgments and cold stares. But the court found in Rachel's favor. The day the verdict came down, David simply vanished from her life, leaving behind only bitterness and unanswered questions. Grief shaped Rachel, but it did not destroy her. When she met Mark Lawson at a charity art auction, he seemed to offer a way back to hope. Mark was a steady presence, his laughter easy, his hands always gentle. He loved Emma, Rachel's daughter from her first marriage, as his own. Together they moved to Maple Creek, determined to build something new, a family, a future, a sanctuary from the storms of the past. The house on Maple Lane became their fresh start. Emma, with her gap-toothed smile and wild imagination, filled the rooms with energy. Mark's job as an architect kept him busy, but he always found time for bedtime stories or weekend hikes. As her belly grew round with the promise of new life, Rachel dared to believe she could finally leave her sorrow behind. But on quiet nights, when the laughter faded and the house settled into stillness, Rachel's thoughts returned to the boy she'd lost. The sound of dripping water haunted her dreams. Sometimes, in the shower or while washing dishes, she would catch her reflection in the glass and see guilt staring back at her. She tried to make peace with her past, telling herself she had done everything she could. She clung to routines, packing Emma's lunches, prepping lessons for her students, folding tiny onesies for the baby to come. She grew closer to her new neighbors, bringing home-baked cookies to block parties and volunteering at St. Mary's Church. She wanted so badly to belong, to feel rooted in this place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where secrets were hard to keep. Yet she remained wary, always a little on the outside, her grief an invisible wall. For Rachel, every new joy, Emma's giggles, the flutter of her unborn child, Mark's reassuring embrace, was laced with the old ache. She loved fiercely, mindful that life could change in a moment. She tried to shield Emma from the sharp edges of the past, teaching her daughter to be kind, to be brave, to trust that love was stronger than pain. And so, on that fateful Halloween, Rachel was not just a victim waiting for the wolf at her door. She was a survivor, a mother whose heart bore old scars, a woman who had rebuilt her life brick by fragile brick. Maple Creek was supposed to be safe, a sanctuary where the worst was behind her. But sometimes, Rachel sensed the past watching her from the shadows, biding its time, waiting for just the right night to return. The night air was heavy with the scent of crushed leaves and candle wax as Mark Lawson steered little Emma through the familiar streets, her pumpkin-shaped candy bucket swinging from her arm. As they approached their house, the neighborhood's laughter and the distant echo of fireworks faded, replaced by an uneasy quiet. Mark noticed the porch light at number 712 flickering. The door, usually locked tight after sundown, stood ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. A father's intuition prickled along his spine. Mark hesitated for a moment before ushering Emma up the path, forcing a smile for her sake. The orange pumpkins still glowed, casting long, grotesque shadows across the stoop. Stepping into the hallway, Mark's shoes crunched on something soft. Looking down, he saw a scattering of brightly wrapped candies, some crushed, some sticky with dark smears. The living room was empty, the TV silent, Rachel's favorite mug abandoned on the table. Emma clung to her father's side, her small voice barely a whisper. Mark called Rachel's name into the stillness. No answer came. The house felt wrong, as if all the warmth and light had been sucked out, leaving only the cold chill of something unfinished. He reached for the landline to call out, only to find the phone cord snapped clean in half, the receiver dangling uselessly. Panic sharpened in his chest. He guided Emma into the kitchen, scanning for any sign of Rachel. The bowl of candy lay upturned on the floor, a trail of blood smeared across the polished wood. On the linoleum, Rachel's wedding ring glinted in the harsh overhead light, lying next to a deep, jagged scratch. Muddy footprints led from the kitchen toward the back door, each print growing fainter as it disappeared into darkness. Emma's gaze followed the trail. Her eyes grew wide, remembering the costume at the door, the wolf mask, the silence. "Mommy opened the door for a wolf," she whispered to no one in particular, her words barely more than a breath. Mark knelt beside her, clutching her tightly as fear clawed at his composure. Sirens pierced the hush within minutes. Red and blue lights flooded the quiet street as detectives and uniformed officers descended on Maple Lane. Neighbors gathered on their lawns in stunned silence, exchanging hushed theories and worried glances. Inside the Lawson house, crime scene investigators dusted surfaces, bagged evidence, and photographed every inch of the chaos. The wolf mask, blood-stained and grotesque, lay abandoned near the threshold, its lifeless eyes staring up at the ceiling. A single, partial fingerprint, smudged and imperfect, marked the doorknob. No signs of forced entry. Whoever had entered, Rachel must have let them in. In the backyard, officers searched by flashlight, scanning the overgrown grass and muddy patches by the fence, but found nothing except for the faint indentations of someone's hurried steps. Emma sat wrapped in a blanket, answering the detectives' questions with the confused honesty of a child. Her words were hauntingly simple. A wolf came. Mommy smiled. Then, she was gone. The investigation consumed the house. Mark, numb and trembling, tried to answer the detective's barrage of questions. Where had he been? Who could have done this? Why would anyone want to harm Rachel? The only answers he had were as hollow as the empty rooms echoing with the absence of Rachel's laughter. As dawn approached, the house at number 712 felt smaller, colder, forever changed. The evidence, the mask, the blood, the broken phone, the missing woman, told a story with no ending. Rachel Lawson was gone. There was no body, no scream, only silence, a scattering of crushed candy, and the memory of a knock that would haunt Maple Creek for years to come. Outside, the last jack-o'-lantern guttered out as night surrendered to morning. In the hearts of those left behind, terror was just beginning. News of Rachel Lawson's disappearance rippled through Maple Creek long before sunrise. By dawn, the usually peaceful suburb was a hive of rumors and speculation. Neighbors peering through curtains or gathering in tight circles on their lawns. Voices lowered to frightened whispers. The house on Maple Lane was cordoned off with yellow tape, its jack-o'-lanterns now more eerie than festive. Reporters in vans with satellite dishes soon crowded the street. Cameras aimed relentlessly at the front door, hoping for a glimpse of the family at the center of a nightmare. Inside, the Lawson home had become a holding ground for grief and suspicion. Mark Lawson, hollow-eyed and exhausted, was questioned for hours by police. The detectives pressed him for details, retracing every step he and Emma had taken the night before. Mark repeated his story, trick-or-treating with his daughter, returning to find the door open, the trail of blood, the missing wife. Each time his answers were met with the same clinical detachment, his every word scrutinized and measured against a backdrop of suspicion. In the eyes of the law, the husband was always the first to be doubted. But Mark's sorrow was raw and real. He clung to Emma, their bond intensified by the loss that had shattered their home. Emma, only 5, could not understand the storm of fear and confusion that now swirled around her. She simply knew that her mother was gone, taken by the wolf she had seen at the door. Her questions became nightly rituals, soft cries in the darkness, searching for answers no one could give. "Did the wolf get Mommy?" she would ask, her voice trembling, her small fingers clutching her father's sleeve. And Mark, helpless, could only hold her close and promise that he would never let her go. The community, once united by block parties and school events, fractured beneath the weight of suspicion. Some neighbors rallied around Mark, bringing casseroles and candles, gathering at St. Mary's Church to pray for Rachel's safe return. Others whispered behind closed doors, pointing out how quickly tragedy had come to a family with a history of loss. Old stories resurfaced: Rachel's first husband, the tragic accident, the trial that had almost destroyed her. Doubts took root in even the most well-meaning hearts. What really happened in the Lawson house? Was it a random act of violence or something darker? Each night, the fear grew thicker. Parents kept their children inside after dusk. Porch lights stayed off. Even Halloween decorations, once a source of joy, were packed away early, as if by removing them, the town could erase the horror that had unfolded beneath their glow. The air itself felt changed, heavier, burdened by the knowledge that safety was an illusion, that evil could slip through an open door and leave nothing behind but silence. Emma was sent to live with her grandparents, her childhood upended in an instant. The house at 712 Maple Lane, once filled with laughter and warmth, became a silent monument to unanswered questions. Mark wandered its empty rooms at night, haunted by memories. The way Rachel's hair glinted in the morning light, the sound of her humming as she painted, the gentle rise and fall of her breath as she read to Emma. The smallest reminders became wounds that refused to heal. In Maple Creek, hope flickered, but grew weaker as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Candlelight vigils outside St. Mary's Church grew smaller, the flames of remembrance shrinking as reality settled in. People still prayed for Rachel, but their voices were softer now, tinged with resignation. Life went on, but nothing was the same. Every knock at the door, every ring of the phone, carried the echo of fear. As the seasons changed, the Lawson case became a ghost story told in hushed tones. Yet for those who loved Rachel, the nightmare remained achingly real. And as the nights grew colder, Maple Creek waited for answers, for justice, for a reason to hope again. The days after Rachel Lawson's disappearance unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare, each hour adding new layers of confusion and frustration. Maple Creek, once a haven of small-town certainty, now found itself at the center of a sprawling investigation. Detectives moved methodically through the quiet streets, canvassing neighbors, collecting statements, and assembling fragments of a puzzle that seemed determined to resist completion. At first, suspicion swirled around Mark Lawson, as it so often does in cases where a spouse vanishes without a trace. Every movement, every detail of his alibi was analyzed and reanalyzed by officers who'd seen too many families fall apart under the pressure of secrets. But there was no sign of forced entry, no evidence that Mark had orchestrated what happened that night. His whereabouts were accounted for by dozens of neighbors and Emma's innocent testimony. Gradually, attention shifted away from the grieving husband. The investigation uncovered something far more disturbing. While sorting through the usual stack of bills and catalogs in the Lawsons' mailbox, detectives discovered a single, unmarked envelope. Inside, a short, chilling message was scrawled in uneven handwriting. "You'll pay for what you did to him." The letter had been mailed 2 weeks before Halloween, its meaning both ominous and painfully clear. To the investigators, the connection to Rachel's past, the death of her son, Ethan, stood out like a bloodstain on clean linen. Detectives traced the envelope and its contents, working backward through postmarks and handwriting analysis. The threat led inexorably to one name: David Brooks, Rachel's first husband. The pain of losing Ethan had never left him, nor had the anger that simmered beneath the surface since the court's verdict years ago. When questioned by police, David seemed calm, almost indifferent. He claimed he had been in Colorado on business that fateful night, and he produced a hotel receipt to prove it. The signature on the receipt, though slightly off, was just convincing enough to raise questions without providing grounds for an arrest. For weeks, the investigation pressed on, dragging every aspect of Rachel's life into the harsh light of scrutiny. Friends and colleagues at Maple Creek Elementary were interviewed again and again, their words parsed for clues or inconsistencies. Police searched the house and surrounding area repeatedly, dredging nearby creeks and interviewing every possible witness. But each search ended with the same emptiness. No body, no weapon. only a trail of fear and unanswered questions. The wolf mask, so vivid in Emma's terrified memory, was analyzed for fibers and prints. Crime lab technicians dusted every inch of the plastic snout and matted fur, searching for DNA that could unravel the mystery. But nothing definitive emerged. Even the muddy footprints, so damning in their initial impression, failed to match any known suspect. It was as if the perpetrator had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only shadows and pain. By December, with the holidays approaching and the trail growing colder by the day, the authorities were forced to make a difficult decision. Without a confession, a body, or hard evidence tying David or anyone else to Rachel's disappearance, the case could not move forward. In a short, somber announcement, the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Department formally closed the Lawson case, listing Rachel as missing and presumed dead. The files were packed into boxes and shelved with countless other unsolved tragedies. Maple Creek felt the loss as a collective wound. Mark and Emma tried to rebuild their lives, but the space Rachel had occupied could never be filled. For many, hope quietly surrendered to resignation. Yet, in the cold silence of the evidence locker, the story of Rachel Lawson refused to rest. There were still secrets to uncover, and somewhere, the truth waited, patient, persistent, and unforgotten. Years slipped by in Maple Creek, each one smoothing over the shock of Rachel Lawson's disappearance, but never erasing its shadow. Seasons changed. Halloween came and went with fewer decorations, fewer children laughing on Maple Lane. House number 712 remained unsold, an unspoken warning to newcomers, a place touched by tragedy, its windows always seeming to watch, waiting for someone who would never return. Mark Lawson, weighed down by memories, eventually left Maple Creek behind. The house became too heavy with reminders of Rachel. The way the morning light slanted across the kitchen, the faint marks on the doorframe where Emma's height had been measured, the lingering scent of her perfume in the bedroom closet. With Emma in tow, Mark sought a new beginning far from the place where hope had crumbled. For Emma, the move did little to dull the ache of loss. She carried the scars of that Halloween night deep inside, the image of the wolf mask and her mother's gentle smile forever etched in her mind. As the years passed, the story of Rachel's disappearance faded into the background noise of daily life. New scandals and sorrows pushed her case further down the list of Maple Creek's concerns. Neighbors who once gathered at candlelight vigils spoke of her less and less, their prayers replaced by resignation. Only the closest friends and family continued to mark her birthday with flowers at St. Mary's Church, a quiet tribute to the woman they had lost. Miles away, in a dusty back room of the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Department, Rachel Lawson's file gathered layers of neglect. Stacked among hundreds of cold cases, the evidence, sealed bags, faded photographs, a wolf mask sealed in plastic, sat untouched, as if waiting for someone to see it anew. For 14 years, no one did. But in 2018, a new detective joined the department, bringing with him a reputation for relentless curiosity and a fresh set of eyes. On a rainy afternoon, sifting through boxes labeled Unsolved, he pulled out Rachel's file, unsettled by the image of the wolf mask and the missing mother. Something about the case, the mixture of innocence and horror, the unanswered questions, refused to let him go. Advances in forensic technology offered hope that the past had not yet spoken its final word. The detective submitted the hair sample collected from the wolf mask to the state's crime lab, requesting a full DNA analysis using methods unavailable in 2004. For weeks, he checked and rechecked the results, combing through digital records and cold case databases, determined to shake something loose from the silence. Then, finally, a hit. The DNA on the mask matched David Brooks, Rachel's ex-husband. His profile was in the system from a 1996 assault arrest, a detail no one had considered important during the original investigation. The connection was impossible to ignore. With this new evidence, the cold case suddenly blazed back to life. Maple Creek buzzed with rumors as news spread of the reopened investigation. Old wounds split open. Those who had doubted Mark Lawson years ago felt the weight of their suspicion. Others, who had always whispered about Rachel's past and the tragedy with her son, now wondered what more had been missed. The detective, undeterred by the swirl of gossip and skepticism, dug deeper, requesting travel records, bank statements, and any information that could place David Brooks near Maple Creek on that fateful Halloween night. For the first time in years, Rachel Lawson's name was spoken aloud with hope, not just as a victim, but as someone whose story deserved an ending. The search for answers reignited old grief, but it also brought a renewed sense of purpose. Justice, it seemed, might finally find its way back to Maple Lane. It was the summer of 2018 when the hunt for truth leapt from yellowed files into blinding headlines. Armed with the new DNA match, investigators traced the last known addresses of David Brooks. They found a paper trail of rented apartments, credit card charges in obscure motels, and the faded remnants of a life that had slowly unraveled. Brooks had not remarried, nor did he keep close friends. The grief and anger that once burned in court had hardened into something colder, more solitary. After weeks of digging, authorities received a tip about a small, run-down house on the outskirts of Reno, Nevada, a place where neighbors recalled an old man who seldom spoke, who wandered the block at night as if searching for something lost. Early on the morning of August 4th, officers converged on the address, their breath visible in the mountain air. They surrounded the house, their radios crackling, a nervous tension in every movement. Inside, the scene was a museum of the past. Photographs lined every wall. Ethan as a baby, Ethan's toys, newspaper clippings about the trial and the tragic drowning. There were boxes stuffed with legal papers and birthday cards never mailed. In the middle of it all sat David Brooks, his hair gone white, eyes ringed with shadows, staring at the faces of a life he could never reclaim. Above his cluttered desk, pinned with a rusted tack, was a headline torn from an old newspaper: "Mother cleared of negligence in child's death." The officers approached quietly, respectful of the strange reverence that filled the air. They found Brooks sitting in a battered armchair, a photograph of Ethan clutched in his hand. He did not fight. He did not flee. Instead, he looked at the men in uniform with an exhausted resignation, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. In the interrogation room, the questions began again. At first, Brooks denied everything, insisting he had been hundreds of miles away on Halloween 2004, just as he'd always claimed. His story was thin, his answers mechanical, but he clung to them, eyes darting from face to face as if hoping someone would believe the lie. Then, the detectives placed the wolf mask on the metal table between them, its empty gaze fixed on Brooks. For a long moment, silence stretched, thick and electric. Something inside him gave way. The old man's shoulders shook, his breath caught in his throat, and he spoke, not with anger, but with a crushing sadness. He told them everything. He had driven from Colorado, the long miles blurring under the weight of his grief and rage. He arrived at Maple Creek, parked blocks away, and waited in the shadows until the last group of children faded from the street. Seeing Rachel open the door, smiling under the glow of Halloween lights, something inside him snapped. He did not remember how many times he struck, only that the world became a blur of red and regret. He confessed to dragging Rachel's body into the backyard, lifting her over the fence, and carrying her to the edge of the Maple River. In the darkness, he watched as the current took her away, the water swallowing what he could not bear to face. For hours he wept, finally admitting that he never wanted to kill her, only to make her feel the pain he lived with every day. The officers listened, letting the gravity of the confession settle between them. A search of the Maple River was ordered without delay. Divers fought the current and mud, dredging up pieces of the past. Among the debris, they found a rusted machete, initials DB, etched faintly into the blade. It was the final piece, the irrefutable evidence that joined past and present, victim and perpetrator. At last, after 14 years, the mystery of Rachel Lawson's disappearance was no longer just a story whispered at Halloween, but a crime with a face, a confession, and a terrible, necessary truth. The trial of David Brooks drew a crowd that Maple Creek had not seen in years. Reporters flocked to the courthouse, their cameras catching every flicker of emotion on the faces of those touched by Rachel Lawson's story. Residents who remembered the quiet art teacher and her cheerful family watched with a mix of relief and sorrow as justice, so long denied, finally seemed within reach. Inside the courtroom, the mood was thick with history. Old wounds pressed close as evidence was laid out. The wolf mask, the threatening letter, the faded photos of Ethan, the rusted blade marked with those damning initials. Prosecutors wove a tapestry of tragedy, loss, rage, and a revenge that festered for years before finally erupting into violence. The defense offered little in the way of comfort or denial. David Brooks, gaunt and tired, sat with eyes cast down, unable to meet the gaze of those who had once been his family. Witnesses recalled Rachel's kindness and the lingering grief she carried after her son's death. They spoke of her resilience, her efforts to rebuild, and the fragile happiness she found in Maple Creek. The community learned more than it ever wanted to know about heartbreak, how easily it could curdle into hatred, and how a single moment could destroy everything that came after. The trial exposed every old wound, forcing everyone to remember not just Rachel's final night, but the years of sorrow that came before. Emma Lawson, now a young woman, found herself in the center of it all. The girl who had once whispered about a wolf at the door was now 20 years old, her childhood lost to the relentless shadow of that night. On the final day of the trial, she stood in front of the court and spoke with a quiet strength that seemed to silence even the hardest hearts. "He took my mother from me, but I won't let hatred take what's left of my life." Her words echoed in the courtroom, a promise to herself and to the mother she barely remembered. After weeks of testimony, the verdict was inevitable. David Brooks was found guilty of first-degree murder and the unlawful killing of an unborn child. The judge's words, delivered in a voice heavy with finality, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no sense of triumph, only the sober understanding that justice, when it finally arrived, could never heal all that had been lost. Outside the courthouse, Maple Creek gathered for a candlelight vigil. Hundreds of people stood together beneath the autumn sky, each flame a tribute to Rachel Lawson and the life she should have lived. The Lawson home, once filled with warmth and laughter, stood silent that Halloween. No children ran up its steps. No pumpkin lights flickered in its windows. Only the wind moved through the trees, rustling the leaves and whispering the memory of a knock that had changed everything. The trial brought answers, but it could not bring peace. Not entirely. For Mark Lawson and his daughter, the future was still shaped by absence, each day a reminder of the woman they loved. But there was also a new kind of hope, a belief that facing the truth, no matter how painful, was the first step toward healing. As autumn deepened and the nights grew longer, Maple Creek learned to remember Rachel not for her tragedy, but for her spirit. Her name became a lesson, her memory a light against the dark. The town that once shuddered at every creak of the floor now carried on, shaped but not destroyed by the pain it had endured. And every Halloween, as porch lights flickered on once more, the story of Rachel Lawson lingered, part warning, part remembrance, and always a call to cherish what can be lost in the blink of an eye. The story of Rachel Lawson's disappearance and the agony that followed haunted Maple Creek for years. Yet beneath the fictional pain and the scars left on her family, the truth was rooted in something heartbreakingly real. For all its twists and details, the tragedy at the heart of this tale mirrored an actual crime, one that unfolded on a cold Halloween night in San Jose, California, nearly 2 decades earlier. The real victim was named Doreen Erbert. Like Rachel, she was 8 months pregnant, awaiting the birth of her second child. Like Rachel, she believed Halloween was a night of innocence, a celebration that turned the darkest hours of autumn into something magical for children and families. But on October 31st, 1984, the spell was shattered forever. The events began as so many nightmares do, with a knock at the door. Doreen opened her home to what she thought would be children in costumes. Instead, she faced a figure in a grotesque wolf mask. The man was not a stranger, but her ex-husband, William Michael Dennis, twisted by grief and resentment after years of legal battles and heartbreak. He attacked Doreen, his rage fueled by wounds that had never healed and a fixation on blame that refused to die. The violence was brutal and sudden. Doreen's husband, Vincent, was away from home, spared the horror by a twist of timing as random as it was cruel. When police arrived, they found evidence eerily similar to what would later haunt the fictional world of Maple Creek. Costume pieces abandoned in haste, the remnants of candy scattered across the floor, and a home transformed into a scene of unspeakable pain. Investigators quickly zeroed in on Dennis, whose history of threats and bitterness painted him as the only possible suspect. He was arrested, and after a lengthy trial, convicted of first-degree murder. The jury was confronted not only with the evidence, but also with the heavy silence of a future denied, a mother lost, a child unborn, a family forever broken. Dennis was sentenced to death in 1998. The case became known across California and the nation as the Wolf Mask Murder of San Jose. In the years that followed, the story was retold on television specials, true crime documentaries, and community forums. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly love could sour into vengeance, and how even the safest night could be shattered by violence. For Doreen's family, the retellings never dulled the pain. They endured anniversaries marked by grief, holidays clouded by absence, and a sense that the world would never be quite right again. The echoes of Doreen's tragedy lived on, not only in court documents and newspaper clippings, but in the way her community remembered her. Friends spoke of her laughter, her kindness, the hope she carried for the baby she would never meet. They gathered for vigils, raised money for violence prevention, and supported one another as best they could. Over time, her name became a symbol, not just of horror, but of resilience and the desperate need for justice. The fictional account of Rachel Lawson drew its power from these real wounds. It invited listeners and readers not only to mourn, but to ask hard questions about forgiveness, anger, and the responsibilities we all share to protect those who are most vulnerable. It was a tribute to a life cut short, a meditation on how loss can ripple through generations, and a call to confront the darkness that sometimes hides behind the most ordinary doors. For the families and communities touched by violence, stories like these are more than entertainment. They are a way to process, to remember, and, most importantly, to hope that truth and justice, even when long delayed, can eventually bring some measure of peace. Years have now passed since the last candle was lit for Rachel Lawson, since the courthouse steps were crowded with news vans and neighbors held each other close under the shroud of tragedy. The story remains, a scar in the history of Maple Creek and in the hearts of those who loved her. Yet, as the seasons continued to turn, the community discovered that memory is not only a burden, but also a kind of blessing. The legacy of Rachel, and of the real-life Doreen Erbert who inspired her story, became something far greater than a tale of horror. In the quiet halls of Maple Creek Elementary, Rachel's memory is kept alive in gentle ways. A mural painted by her students, art supplies donated in her name, the annual Halloween festival now dedicated to her spirit. Colleagues remember her patience, her laughter, her unwavering faith in second chances. For the children who pass through those halls, Rachel is no longer just a victim, but a symbol of kindness and resilience, a lesson that the best we give can live on long after we are gone. Her family, too, learned to carry both the pain and the light of her memory. Mark Lawson rebuilt his life, not by forgetting, but by cherishing the quiet moments. Emma's smile, the sound of rain on the roof, the way hope flickers even after the darkest night. Emma, once the little girl who whispered about the wolf at the door, grew into a young woman shaped by loss but not defined by it. She spoke about her mother not in terms of tragedy, but as a person full of warmth and courage, a mother who had fought to create joy even after the world took so much from her. For Maple Creek, the events of that Halloween became a reminder that evil does not always wear a stranger's face, and that grief can twist the most ordinary heart into something dangerous if left unchecked. In church pews and living rooms, people spoke more openly about the need to recognize pain before it festers, to offer help to those who suffer in silence, to never mistake anger for strength. Each year, when October arrives, neighbors check in on one another, light candles in their windows, and remember that justice is not just about punishment, but about compassion, vigilance, and the determination to make sure such darkness cannot return unnoticed. In telling Rachel's story and the story of Doreen Erbert, there is a lesson that echoes through every detail. Recognize the signs of grief, anger, and obsession before they turn into tragedy. The silence that allowed pain to become violence must never be repeated. When someone shows warning signs, threats, obsession, sudden changes in behavior, it is not meddling to reach out. It is an act of love, of courage, and sometimes of survival. Justice came for Rachel and Doreen, but it was slow, imperfect, and could never restore what had been lost. Yet in the end, truth brought a measure of peace, a small comfort to those left behind, a guide for those still searching for hope after loss. The scars remain, but so do the memories of how they lived, as loving mothers, as generous friends, as people whose stories deserve to be told not for their endings, but for the lives they touched. For every family broken by violence, for every child who grows up missing a parent, this story stands as both warning and tribute. Let us honor them not only with our grief, but with our resolve to do better, to listen, to speak up, to never let the quiet cry for help go unanswered. Some wounds can only be healed by the truth. To everyone who hears this story, help us remember, help us seek justice, and help us preserve the stories of those still waiting for answers. Subscribe to our channel to join in honoring the lost, and let their lessons light the way forward.